My name is Vishal Singh and I'll be teaching you chess today. So in the previous class, we had finished defending by capturing the attacker, and today we'll be starting with all about castling in detail. What castling is, when can it be done, when can it not be done, and why is it so useful. Alright, so let's start with the class today. I'll be sharing my screen now. Okay, so about the castle, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned about it in my previous classes as well. Castling is basically protecting your king in advance. It is also the only move where the king can move two blocks at a time. Usually, the king can only move one block at a time. But when you castle, the king is allowed to move two blocks, and what basically happens is king moves two blocks inside, and the rook moves on the other side of the king. Similarly, if the king is doing castling on the left side, the rook will move to the other side of the king. So it doesn't matter if the king is castling on the left side or the right side. The king will only move two blocks at a time. Got it? Okay. So now in this situation, the king can castle, and it can castle to the right side or the left side. If you castle to the right side, it is called castling on the king side. If you castle on the left side, it's called castling on the queen side. Got it? So I'll show you. Castling on the right is we castled on the king side. This is called castling on the king side. If you castle on the left side, it's called castling on the queen side. Now the difference is when you castle on the right side, there's only one block left at the right end. But when you castle on the queen side, there are two blocks left on the left end. Okay, quite simple. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, do you think the king can castle in this situation? Are the situations met over here? Yes, they are. The king can easily castle. He can castle on the right side, on the king side, and also on the queen side. Okay. Okay. So now what happens in the situation where the rook is not on its initial position? Well, in this situation, you cannot castle on the king side. You see the rook has moved from its initial position. Doesn't matter if it's the king, if it's the rook or the king. If any of them has moved even once from the initial position, you can no longer castle on that side. And if the king has moved, doesn't matter which side you try to castle on, you cannot castle, because king is the main piece of the castling. Rook decides which side you want to move on. So if you move the right side rook, you cannot castle on the right side. If you move the left side rook, a queen side rook, you cannot castle on the queen side. But if you've moved the king, you've lost the option to castle on both the sides. Quite simple. Okay, so now in this case, we cannot castle on the king side. So the only option we have left is to castle on the queen side. Got it? Quite simple. Okay, now what happens in this situation? Pause the video, think, and then come back. Okay, we see the right side rook has moved. Okay, the left side rook has not moved, and the king, well, the king has moved in this situation. The initial position for the white king is always e1, remember, and the initial position for the black king is always e8. Well, the initial position for the white king, as I mentioned, is e1. Is our king on e1 right now? He's not, right? So the king has moved. Now that the king has moved, he has lost the opportunity to castle on either of the side. So see, there is no option to move two blocks with the king. There is no option. The computer isn't allowing me, the software isn't allowing me to castle anymore. Why? Because the king has moved in this situation. So we cannot castle in this given situation. Okay, let's move on. Okay, how about now? The rook on the king side has not moved. The rook on the queen side has not moved. And even the king has not moved. So, can we castle now? Again, pause the video, think, and then come back. Okay, so in this situation, we still cannot castle. Why? Because our path is being blocked. Our own knight is blocking our path to castle on the king side, and the enemy knight is blocking our path to castle on the queen side. So if there is any piece in between during the castle, we cannot castle. The path has to be clear if you want to castle. Got it? So rule number 1, the pieces should have not moved from the initial position. Rule number 2, there should not be any piece in between when you want to castle. Got it? Let's go ahead. So what now? Do you think you can castle? Here comes the rule number 3. If you want to castle and your king is currently in the check, you cannot castle. You have to first evade the check. Not evade. If you try to evade, you'll be moving your king. So you should not move your king. If you still want to castle, make sure your king is in the same initial position. What you can do is defend by interposing. So in this given situation, you can interpose using your knight. So you have gotten out of the check. Now suppose I play queen to e6. Now do you have a chance to castle? Yes, you do. Because all the conditions have been met. That is, your king, your rooks have not moved from the initial position. There is no piece in between on the king side and the queen side. And your king is currently not under any kind of check. So castle is possible in this situation on both the sides. Got it? Quite simple. Okay, let's move ahead. All right, now what happens now? Do you think you can castle now on any of the side? Okay, now here comes the rule number 4. Let's see if we can castle. Well, we cannot. Why? Let's see. The enemy white bishop and the enemy black bishop are occupying these blocks as the current attack range. So their attack range is extending and they are actually blocking our part to castle. So in between, the king can only move. Remember, I told you the king can move only 2 blocks. So if there is any other enemy piece that is controlling the box that the king is choosing as a part to castle, so the castle cannot happen. So if you want to castle on the right side, make sure none of these blocks are under the enemy control. Currently, this block here, right at G1, is under enemy control. Why? Because the bishop has its attack range extended till G1. So we cannot castle because you cannot land in a check. After you castle, you cannot land in a check. Remember. So you are not currently under check, but after check, you should not immediately land under castle. So you cannot castle. So rule number 4, the path should not be under enemy's control. Got it? The attack range should not extend. Well, if the enemy had this block under control B1 on the queen side, so that would have been fine. You could still have been able to castle. Why? Because the king is only moving till C1. So the 2 blocks, right, on the right, on the king side, and on the queen side of the king, should not be under the enemy's control when you try to castle. Got it? Rule number 4, quite simple. So in this given situation, you cannot castle. Very simple. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, now in this situation, can we castle on the king side? Think. Take a minute if you want. Well, we cannot. Why? Because as soon as we complete our castle, our king will land on G1. And as soon as our king lands on G1, it will directly be under the check because of the bishop. So we cannot castle on the right side. Can we castle on the left side? Think. Well, yes, we can. The king will only move 2 blocks. That is up till C1, up to C1. So the king will not be under any kind of check, and the 2 blocks are not under the enemy's control. So our king can easily move across them. So in this given situation, we can only do castle on the queen side. Got it? Very simple. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, now that all that is over, let's do some short puzzles whether we can castle in the situation or whether we cannot castle in the situation. So do you think you can castle in this situation? Pause the video, think, and then come back. Okay. So yes, we can castle on both the sides, even on the right and even on the left. Why? Let's see if the situations are met. Well, our rook any of our rook has not moved from its initial position. Our king is still on its initial position. So, so rule number 1 is complete. Rule number 2, there is nothing, there is no piece blocking the way for our castle. So that is complete. Rule number 3, there is, our king is not under check from anywhere. So that is complete. Rule number 4, there is no piece that is that has its attack range extended till the 2 blocks around the king. That is C1, D1, F1, and G1. So none of these blocks are under the enemy's control at the moment. So we can castle easily on both the sides. Got it? Very simple. So let's see. Complete. And we can castle on the left side, on the queen side as well. Okay. So that was all for today. I hope you guys understood all the rules about castling and when it can be done and when it cannot be done. And we'll be doing some short and easy puzzles about castling, whether you can do this, whether you cannot, and also how to stop the enemy from performing the castle. That is, we do not want the enemy king to be safe, right? We want our king to be safe. So we'll be learning a little bit about that as well in the next upcoming classes. So see you guys in the next class. Bye bye.